everybody, Aimer back with another Mission Impossible episode review. This time we've got from the Revival Season 2 Episode 4, which is called Command Performance. So this one starts off with the man being chased by police holding a jeweled cross. He appears to be shot multiple times but manages to get to a large statue, staring at it for a moment. He ends up crawling into a church where he meets Father Thomas Vallis, telling him David and writing numbers with his blood. The priest looks at the numbers and then wipes the blood away as the soldiers arrive with their leader Ivan Savitch, who orders Father Vallis taken to a prison called the Tower. Jim uses spy speak with the florist to get his disc player. The mission: Defense Minister Savitch of a democratic Baltic country is desperately looking for the cross of St. Boniface, which is a sacred relic to his people because it contains information detailing his various crimes. The dead man we saw stole it from a museum, and the mission is to rescue Father Vallis and the cross. We get another proper apartment scene where we see that Nicholas will portray a representative from the Vatican. Grant has a device that can crumble stones, and there will be a command performance of a circus in 3 days that will help the IMF get out of the country. That's where the episode title comes from. Off the IMF go with Jim as Buck Van Zant, strong-arming the circus owner into letting him set up his sideshow truck, telling him he's got some bad press with Savitch and wouldn't want to stir up any troubles if they can just come to an agreement. And the absolutely smoking hot Shannon, who Jim says is his wife Cleo, just standing there, gets him to go along with it. The truck is, of course, the IMF's base of operations where they're setting up a bunch of things. At the Tower, Savitch is giving Father Vallis a painful truth serum to get him to talk. And it's quite powerful, so the priest does in fact tell him what the fugitive said to him and wrote. But of course that doesn't get Savitch any closer to finding the cross. And Father Vallis doesn't quite know what to make of the information either. Nicholas shows up as Dr. Kovalovsky, the expert from the Vatican, butting heads with Savitch's henchman Braun, while Max and Grant cycle to an area outside of the tower and make the difficult climb to a barred window, with Grant using his disruptor so they can get in. Max steps on a stone which partially activates a bear trap, which Grant is able to wedge open slightly so Max can escape. Savitch and Nicholas go to Father Vallis' church, where Braun joins them and asks Nicholas pointedly about phone calls he's receiving from someone who calls himself Z, who Nicholas says is Buck Van Zant, who's been trying to contact him for a while now. So Savitch immediately heads to the circus to confront Jim as Buck, demanding answers about the cross. Jim tells him that he contacted Nicholas to identify another item that he found on his travels. He doesn't know anything about any cross. Jim conveniently drops the item so that Shannon and Savitch can get a bit close to each other, and he's clearly smitten. Savitch tells Braun to watch all three of them, indicating that he's fairly sure Jim doesn't have the cross. If he did, he wouldn't be hanging around, and Savitch figures that Jim may lead them to it. Plus, he figures that if push comes to shove, he can get Shannon to tell him anything he wants to know. Jim and Shannon make a duplicate of the cross that would pass all but the most stringent tests, such as carbon dating. Nicholas records some audio of Savitch and puts it on a recording chip. A mask of Father Vallis is prepared, while Max and Grant approach his cell, finding some almost video game-like traps along the way. Shannon heads out to the car, finding Braun in the back seat, telling her to drive. They end up at the tower, of course, to see Savitch. Shannon figures it must be about that cross that Jim and Buck is looking for, and she tells Savitch he's close to finding it. They banter, and Shannon is able to put the recording chip on Savitch's phone. He tells her he wants to know every move Jim makes, and makes a pass at her, earning him a vicious slap and an appreciation that Shannon's no pushover. Max and Grant find the stones leading into Vallis' cell and wait for their signal. Jim shows us that the real cross contains a computer chip with the information that Savitch is hoping to keep secret, and the IMF has made a duplicate of it with useless data on their duplicate cross. Shannon calls Savitch to get him away from the tower, and Nicholas goes there with a letter, ostensibly from Savitch, allowing him to see Father Vallis. Braun is skeptical about it, so places a call to Savitch's office, which the recording chip answers, indicating to Braun that he should cooperate fully. Shannon meets Savitch at the church and earns a return slap when she says she doesn't have the cross, but tells him that Jim buried it in a park, hoping to retrieve it when the heat was off. Savitch tries making another pass, but Shannon is able to hold him off this time. Savitch finds the IMF's cross and gets his man to get a printout of the data right away. Meanwhile, Nicholas and Braun come to Vallis' cell, where Nicholas shoots Braun with a knockout gun and sends Max and Grant their signal, allowing them to enter. Braun is fitted with the Vallis mask and robe, and the priest takes his uniform. They exit out the way Max and Grant came and go back to the IMF van. Father Vallis is glad to be rescued, but still distraught over not having any idea where the real cross is. Jim says the time is running out before Savitch comes right to the IMF truck again, and they had better figure out what the museum thief was trying to tell him. After some thought and discussion, Father Vallis realizes that what the man said was actually a biblical reference to the shadow of wings, reminding him of the eagle statue near his church. The next morning, Savitch goes to the prison cell where Braun has just woken up and is able to open the cell door by voice command, then sees a reflection of Vallis' face in a pool of water. Savitch shows him the cross and shoots him, and then discovers the mask. The printout from the microchip turns out to be pages of a phone book, and Savitch goes predictably ballistic, telling his lieutenant to go and nab the circus people right away, but it's time for the command performance, so he'll have to settle for closing the borders and getting every one of his men there to make sure the circus people don't escape. Max and Grant, as maintenance men, find the real cross hidden in the eagle statue as the Prime Minister arrives at the circus by helicopter. Savitch arrives in force with the secret police and explains to the Prime Minister that they are there as extra security. Jim gives a ringmaster a drink to help with his cough, but it actually gives him laryngitis. Jim offers to take his place in a funny conversation, and the performance begins. Savitch is surprised to see Jim in the middle of the show, but of course can't do anything about it, other than ordering his men to search the backstage area, where the IMF and Father Vallis are dressing up as clowns and other performers to disguise themselves. Outside, Max uses a knockout gun to subdue the helicopter pilot, as Shannon enters as an elephant rider, frustrating Savitch that his men can't seem to pin their targets down. The others enter as part of the clown act, using a trampoline to get up on a ledge and out through the top of the circus tent. Nicholas leaves, followed by Shannon, as Savitch tries to interfere, but the other clowns pile on him as part of the act. Next goes Father Vallis, who drops the cross on his way out, of course. Then Grant, and finally Jim, who picks up the cross on his way out, and the IMF fly away. Mission accomplished. I'm going to give this episode a grade kind of on the border of A- and B+. It's got some good things about it. The one thing that really struck me is that it has a real old school feel and reminds me so much of seasons 2 and 3 from the original series. So many, in fact, just about all of the components that made so many episodes so good are here in this episode as well. The IMF is going to a foreign country. The female agent does what she does so well. The preparation scenes in the IMF truck, and the way we had two agents playing the roles from one side and the other three kind of from the other side, and then the whole thing comes together. What it reminds me most of is, in terms of its structure, was the episode from season 3 of the original series, The Mercenaries. If you remember that one, it shares so much in common with this. You had Jim and Cinnamon working against the target in that one, with Cinnamon really playing up her sexuality, and then the other three were kind of working the mark from the opposite way in terms of working towards what he was looking for. In that case, they pulled off a gold heist because the guy was looking for hidden gold. And here it's kind of the same thing. They're looking for a cross, and they give him a fake cross, right? Kind of a pennies from heaven sort of thing. And obviously, of course, in the original episode, The Mercenaries, you had Rollin playing the role of, kind of an infiltrator, getting in with the bad guy, sort of, kind of like Nicholas does here. And then you had Max and Grant playing the roles of Barney and Willie, doing all of the heavy lifting and the tougher physical stuff. So it reminded me so much of that episode. Also, it has the whole, oh, I will take the role of somebody who I just happen to resemble thing, which happens so frequently in the original series that Nicholas does here. The expert from the Vatican, the picture obviously is, Thao Penglis with a fake beard and all of that sort of thing. So, yeah, of course there's a resemblance there. But, whatever. It is what it is. I really like the old school feel here, long story short. Also, there's the old school bad guy going gaga over Shannon, just like men used to do with Cinnamon Carter. I don't think that Jane Badler has ever looked hotter on this show. She hasn't so far until now, and I can't think of an episode in which she kind of plays up the sexuality thing again. I could be wrong, but I can't think of one right now. So I think this is the topper as far as that goes. And definitely I would say that the way that Grigor Taylor, who plays Savitch, and Jane Badler as Shannon, the way that they play off each other is top notch. That is some really fine television right there. You can really kind of feel all the tension, between them in so many ways. Really, really like that. Speaking of which, in terms of the guest stars, Grigor Taylor as Savitch is really good. I'll talk a little bit more about him. The other guys are okay. Nicholas Bell as Braun is fine for his role. And we have Ivar Kantz as Father Thomas Vallis. He had actually a brief role last season in the episode The Legacy. He was Paul von Schau, who was the Nazi grandson, so to speak, who was kind of taken out of the picture by the IMF early on in the episode. Speaking of the Savitch character, I think he's a good character. Certainly Grigor Taylor's portrayal of him is great. As a character, he's lame, but in a very entertaining way, despite being unstable and angry and very kind of emotive. He reminds me a lot of the way that Albert Paulson would be with many of his characters from the original series. Albert Paulson was really great at playing a cantankerous old man who was prone to fits of just getting angry or demanding all of a sudden, and he was really entertaining doing it. Here, I see kind of the same thing. Not as good as Albert Paulson, because Albert Paulson was fantastic. But Grigor Taylor really plays it up at just the right times. And I really like the way that, he's got that going, but he can also be really kind of hard-nosed and quiet. And I kind of like the juxtaposition of that and the opposition of those things. If he just kind of played it up and was kind of, clownish in a sense, that wouldn't have been so great. The IMF really do a number on Savitch, so I can't really call him a schmuck. I do characterize him as being lame, but that's because the IMF is just able to engineer situations, given that, for obvious reasons, Savitch is so narrow-mindedly predictable. That's what gives him his lameness, because he's really only got one thing to worry about, but boy, is that a really big thing. Despite the old school feel, this is not a cookie cutter episode. I like the different facets of the episode where the IMF both has to engineer these situations, maneuver around certain dangers, and also solve a little bit of a mystery. They have to figure out what those clues mean from the very beginning. We see it, we hear the word David, we see the 1769 that's written there, and that is a big part of the plot. And we don't get the solution to that mystery until almost towards the end of the episode. So this is structured really, really well in that regard. Characters like Ivan Savitch are about as good as you're going to get for villains in the revival. I really, with the revival, you really just hope that they're entertaining and not abject morons. And certainly Savitch fits that characterization. Yes, he's got some lameness, but just about all villains do. And at least they don't suffer from the other kisses of death. So I think he's fine here. I also think that there is a reasonable degree of difficulty in this mission for the IMF. As I mentioned, this is not a cookie cutter plot. It's not just leading somebody through the steps. The IMF has to figure some things out as they go. They did the best they could in terms of planning, but as I said, have to figure some things out on the way. A few things, though, just bug me. First of all, the scenes in the tower with Max and Grant. Max getting in and out of the bear trap, the other traps that we see, almost kind of like, Raiders of the Lost Ark and Indiana Jones escaping from the cave. They're neat. They're visually it creates this kind of sense of danger. It's kind of hokey, though. And so is the disruptor thing that Grant has in order to kind of, use resonance or whatever to disrupt stone. That's not terribly bad. The device that is apparently pre-programmed on an analog phone, a dumb mechanical analog phone that's supposed to work, a computerized chip to automatically and intelligently respond to phone banter. That's kind of a reach for those old school phones. So the gadgetry here, I think, leaves a little bit to be desired in some of those kind of special things. It's not really bad, but it's just really contrived and a little bit overly contrived. And a lot of it is just for two reasons. First of all, it looks cool. But the more important reason is that there was time to fill, so that the other characters would actually really have something to do and you could make a full hour episode out of the thing. There is a lot of padding in this episode if you think about it carefully enough. A few other things that bothered me. When the IMF and Father Valis are trying to figure out what the guy who stole the cross was trying to tell the father before he died, they mention David and the numbers 1769. Shannon writes them down on a chalkboard. And the way that she writes it, she writes down David, and then she writes 17, and the 69 is separated. Kind of like she knew the numbers were to be separated. But how could she have known that? Like right off the bat. Normally, if somebody were to say David 1769 to me, I would write the numbers all together. I wouldn't separate them out into pairs. Eventually, maybe they could figure that out, but for her to do that kind of automatically, that's cheating a little bit. Anyway, again, I guess they got to that point in the episode and now they realize, well, we got to hurry this up a little bit, so whatever. Couple of other things. The voice on tape refers to Savitch by his first name and calls him Ivan. When he first meets Shannon, he introduces himself as Ivan. But it's multiple points, at least one that I can recall very distinctly, but I think at other points as well, Jim refers to him as Ivan Savitch. And that's really odd to me. If the voice on tape says he's Ivan and he himself says it's Ivan, why would Jim call him Ivan? I don't get that. And that was kind of dumb, and that was something that should have been corrected either in post-production or they should have shot the scene again, I think. Final note about things that are weird. There's a point where Savitch goes to the church to meet Shannon, who says, I've got some information for you. He doesn't take Braun or his other lieutenant. Now, part of the plot is that meeting was set up in order to get Savitch away from the tower so that, they can use that computer chip that Shannon had planted earlier. But for Savitch to go there alone, I know it's just Shannon, but for somebody who's as paranoid as him, why would he go alone? Unless he thought that there was a chance, you think? I don't know. Did he actually think that he was going to get somewhere with Shannon. Nothing else kind of makes sense to me about why that would be the case. Of course, for plot reasons, I do get it. But in real world terms, I'm thinking, boy, that's a bit of a reach, buddy, if you think that that's where this is going. But anyway, hope springs eternal, I suppose. Last point I'll make, not that this is weird, but something neat that I'll just point out. The Prime Minister in this episode is played by Charles Dance. And if you've heard that name before, you'll recognize it as soon as you see this picture. Charles Dance was Tywin Lannister from Game of Thrones. And obviously this episode was filmed 20 years before that series started. But wow, what a difference. Like he's practically unrecognizable to me. And if I had not looked at the credits, and even then I had to go and check, boy, is it the same Charles Dance? And it turns out that it is. So, again, small world. Just to wrap this one up, in terms of the callbacks, I've already mentioned the mercenaries for the actual overall structure of the episode. And I think that is an important callback for this, for that reason. But obviously the more obvious callback would be to the early season 1 episode, Old Man Out. So many similarities there. We're talking about, a religious leader that the IMF has to free. And we're talking about, using a circus as cover for their activities. And, having, a menacing authority figure kind of lurking around and, causing difficulty for the IMF and their mission. And the way that the IMF makes their escape under cover of, their circus people act and all of that. So a lot of similarities going back to Old Man Out as well with this one. Anyway, I'm comfortable with my grade of A-/B+. I thought about this episode and I said to myself, is this as good as The Princess, which we had just the last episode? And I said, no, I think it's got a few things that would bring it a notch or two down from there. So that's why I think it should be in this range. However, still pretty good for the Revival series and for season 2 overall. Let's hope that we can keep it going. Thank you guys, as always, for watching. It is much appreciated, of course. Please subscribe to the channel so that you get notifications when new videos come out. And please leave your comments about this episode and other episodes. Thank you guys again, and I will see you.